I couldn't say. There's nobody off the ditch, and I don't know what they were pulled over for, but
It's a scary time, everybody learning how to drive in the snow.
yeah,
again.
but Dave was saying he didn't see anybody off the 149. That's like the famous road when it gets bad. So
Yeah.
that's a good thing.
I came down Turn Road, and everybody was very,
It was, yeah,
staying spaced,
Yeah.
and nobody on your bumper,
Yeah,
which is
that's
for
the
Turn
way-
Road is really great.
Yeah. that's, I don't know if it was the same way.
Robert Meza. All right, our audio's working.
And I just upgrade him to panelist if he wants.
Oh.
to do it.
Yeah. We're gonna put you on the screen, Rob. I was surprised how many trucks were out this morning. I don't think I've ever seen so many trucks out on the roads this early.
So there,
Hi,
Morning. Morning, Rob.
everybody.
yeah.
Hi, Rob.
There's Jen. Jen.
Morning, Dan.
You have to go to Syracuse today?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I want to go, so. Tell me.
yeah. No, I figured that's where you were going.
Yeah.
Oh, we gotta be concise.
Yeah.
We can't even let you speak today.
That's right. Can't go around today, for sure.
Nothing but listening.
Okay.
Yeah. Cindy can't be here. She's not well at all.
Okay.
So,
Guess we're ready to rock and roll.
yeah.
Okay, good morning. First on the audit committee agenda, revisiting the corrective action plan, the draft corrective active plan discussion. Couple of typos I saw in it and reviewing it that we'll take out. In the heading, it refers to the response letter. We'll take that out. Of course, we've made the response letter. It's just a corrective action plan. Remove the word draft from the first paragraph in regards to the audit report now that it's finalized. And a have versus has typo. But in terms of format and what is in the corrective action plan, any discussion, elaboration, changes desired for how the plan of attack looks?
I just had one thought, and I don't know if this is something you put in the corrective action plan. So on page 2, for the controller recommendation 2.
Yep.
It said about identifying capital and major equipment needs. So I thought that was really good. That was, but I was wondering, we don't need to do board approval for any of those capital or major equipment needs. That was just my question. Or do we?
We board approved the plan with that in it. Do you mean the actual purchase of the equipment needs?
Yeah, that was my only, that was just what a question I had. Because I thought doing the schedule was a really good idea, and I think it's important to put it in the plan. I know that was the recommendation, but I was just curious if, once that happens, do we have to approve those, like you were buying equipment needs? I was just curious.
I would think so.
Well,
Generally, it's approved through the budget process. So if it's in the budget to be purchased, it's approved that way. Each individual thing was purchased off state contract normally, so it wouldn't necessarily go through the board.
Okay, so. but
There
look-
might still be recognition. I'm just trying to think back to some of the big things that we've bought. I'm trying to think back to, we bought a payloader recently.
Mhm.
Um,
payloader.
If there wasn't enough money in the budget and it was deemed a need by the board, then we'd have to by resolution pass it. The 200 codes are very strict into, like Peter said, you approve it in the budget. So say Alex's 1620 equipment code, he can't go over that amount. Dave can't take money from supplies and transfer it to equipment.
Right.
So if we were out of money and we needed a payloader, we would have to come to the board for an increase to the budget.
But if it's covered in the budget, Rob, the board would not have to approve the purchase, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, like a school bus.
Yes.
We put the bus in the budget as opposed to the individual voter authorization.
Do we get some sort of report that tells us what you bought or no? When you do it?
You
Just curious.
No, but you could.
Yeah.
It should all be on the reports, Jen. We pretty much have these equipment updates or list replacement plans up here. So I'll ask Alex to put that on the, if not this agenda, the following agenda, and you can see his, and then I can get Andy's when he's back. I know Andy has it.
Okay.
Okay. So once we have the replacement schedule in the corrective action plan, will that help us with the budget process? Because we'll be able to see, okay, we have this on this replacement schedule, so it should be reflective in the upcoming budget.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
You can also, as part of the comptroller recommendation to kind of cover this conversation right now, you can add to it a year-end report. Right, so at the end of the year, we want to look at that, and in the year-end report, there can be a listing of the things that were purchased. Because going into the year, you're gonna know, here's what we're scheduled to buy this
Right.
year on the replacement cycle.
Yeah,
At the end of the year, you can do a year-end report and say, we were able to get all this stuff, or we got these 7 things, and then that would.
Yeah, I don't want to make it a major project for you guys.
No, I don't think it's a major project. I think it probably is it's a good point, because at the end of the year, no matter what, internally, we have to see if these are the 7 things that we said we needed. If we only got 6 of them, how are we gonna make sure we get, can that 7-1 get
Right.
moved to a year?
Right.
What happens, that's where the dominoes start
Mhm.
getting messy, so.
yeah. So when we add that to like, that would be like number 4, that we'd have an entity report, or just incorporate that sentence into if we don't write it down, we'll forget. If I think this is a good conversation. Is that what we,
Well, I mean,
I don't know, maybe we don't want
maybe I'm
to do
speaking
that.
out of turn, but I mean, we can't put a 4 because isn't this the district? I mean, the comptroller gave you 3 items, right?
Those are directly from the report.
So we can't like add a 4th.
Oh, no, I meant
Letter
it,
Response.
like, we've got our recommendations. So our district response, we put it in.
You put it in there,
Yeah, that's what I'm
Yeah,
trying to
yeah,
say. Oh,
yeah.
no, not to add another, no, heavens, no.
It could run through the facilities committee on an ongoing agenda basis too. If you just wanted equipment update, it'd be a pretty simple thing to do each meeting. Just this is where we are with equipment.
Well, because I was already thinking ahead, but I didn't look at my notes on the next page. So where our district response was, my question was, could we add a statement that, I'll kind of read what I wrote down, that we'll approve a resolution stating that the plan has been reviewed in the correction action plan. So just kind of putting it in writing that, because I think we say it somewhere else, but just to add that we'll just have a resolution that we did what we said we were going to do, that basically we reviewed the plan, because it says we've decided to review the multi-year capital plan on an annual basis. So just do a resolution that we have
That has been
reviewed it.
reviewed.
Yeah, I don't know, that was just a thought.
Yeah, I like that idea. Is number 3 what we just talked about with making sure that the plans are reviewed and updated annually, or it says periodically, but we can do annually?
Yeah,
Well, we did annually in the district response. The comptroller was recommending more
Okay.
loosely in a periodic basis.
but I like what you said about making a list or whatever, saying if we had like if we had 7 items,
Mhm.
we did 6,
Within
just, I think that's a great idea to do that. And then if we did a resolution saying we reviewed it, then we kind of held ourselves accountable too, but it was just a thought.
Yeah, I like it.
How many years
That should be
is
helpful
the
for Alex
plan?
too.
Yeah,
I know we talked about numbers of years. I remember 3 and 4 year numbers that we talked about. Is that our capital plan lays out what we plan to do or over the next 3 or 4 years?
The financial, we talked about deciding to keep 4. We talked about maybe backing it to 3, but keeping the 4, which kind of made sense, especially because the ARC monies fall off on the 4th year. So that keeping that year in there. Capital, I think was 5, Rob? You remember that?
That's what I was planning on 5.
So are there 2 planes? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Okay, I got that part of it. Because the capital part of it is going to be fairly involved, because that is where we're going to kind of describe our approach to, you know, the dilemma we have with the schools, you know, the way we're going to go move forward, you know, with adding to schools or building a middle school, all the stuff that's currently kind of on the table. And that would be reflected in this, right? So that's going to be something that'll be coming forward in the next, you know, short period of time. And we're going to have to define some of those things, right? Because right now we have this sort of untenable situation that we have, our elementary schools are stressed, you know, right? I mean, you're looking at the, you know, the way they're set up. I mean, we certainly, it would be, I would think, I'm speaking for myself at least, that the priority would be to solve those issues either in phases or, but, you know, address it immediately, you know, try to address it immediately, because, you know, we're almost halfway through this school year, and it certainly is not going to change this school year, but can we make any meaningful changes for next school year? And that would seem to be reflected in that. Is that the general thinking here?
Well, I think, yes, for the 5-year plan, I don't know that the capital plan is really gonna have much in it to address the current situation for next school year. I think the biggest conversation for next school year is, do you redistrict the kids and redistribute to balance the schools as best you can? Or do you not do that and leave them stressed the way that they are for next year, as to not disrupt kids to have to move again? That was kind of the conversation that came up at the last meeting with Ross's team. And that's really a philosophical question. Do you want to move some kids around to better balance the schools, knowing that they're going to be stressed no matter what?
No matter what.
The other option that does exist that we just don't have an answer on is, what can we do with this half of the building for classroom space for next year? If we wanted to further reduce building capacities, do you open this as a 7th elementary school? It would be small because you'd only really have, you know, 7 or 8 classrooms, but you could do something here if you wanted to, if we could get a capital project passed with SED fast enough to do it. We'd have to find a home too, but I think your best bang for your buck for next year is redistributing the kids a little bit. But the long term, to your point, the capital plan would most certainly have to include, we need to do these additions here. We need to do a full scale renovation there. We need to add a wing over here. That's got to be a part. That's got to be step one. How do you relieve those buildings? And then maintenance after that.
Because I've been spending a lot of time lately, actually going around in circles, but looking at, after the exposure to Ross in those 2 meetings we had, the virtual meeting we had with them, and then the meeting with the community at Stroud, and going back and looking at, you know, where we are last year versus this year with the way our schools are configured, you know, the number of, I mean, with the Staley thing, we've dramatically reduced the number of sections that we have, you know, K6, and right now, you know, I made this little matrix that kind of mapped the section sizes as a function of grade level and school. And boy, there, you know, it's amazing how much spread there is given in a given school, or I mean, like a difference of 10 students, you know, section to section, not like at first grade, or, you know, and yet in the public session, a lot of what was said there was a little mind-boggling, because what people were advocating for was, a lot of them anyhow, was that, you know, keeping our 6 or 7 grade structure in the schools, and, you know, and keeping kids in like a homeschool environment. A lot of them talked about, you know, kids going to school for all those years with their cohort, you know, their little local cohort. And, you know, there's no way to do that unless we do what Peter said, and what Ross is suggesting, and that is do some sort of a, redistribution based on, like he had those numbers, because he took those, and all the numbers don't really align. His numbers, like for total students, don't exactly align with our enrollment numbers for this year or last year, but they're close enough that, it's not worth worrying about. But what you see is the bottom line. I've got to cut to the bottom line. We had, if I remember the numbers correctly, this year we have like 113 sections in the elementary schools, K-6, and not considering the special class situation, okay? With that banding that he gave us, you take that essentially that same number of students and you put it in those bands across the same number of schools, and he has, it's like 10 fewer sections. So, it's dramatic. And they're equal, and each section, each first grade section it may be large, but they're all the same size. So in terms of the capacity of that school, you've really increased it. If every one of your sections is full, then you can't do much better than that unless you create rooms or something like that. And I was looking at all of that, and I was thinking about what was going on in our capital planning, which is really gotten more oriented towards the RFA environment and some of the things there. And I was saying, gee, what should we be addressing? And I know that's the next capital project, I guess, that gets us
Right.
to the elementaries. But boy, that's kind of far off right now, right?
Next December. We can't do any planning for the elementaries until we have a configuration notification known. Because the amount of time it takes for them, in order to get a project approved with SED, we have to be able to tell SED exactly what we're trying to do so that they can put figures to it and numbers. So without knowing what configuration the board is going to land on, it's really tough to be able to plan for how many classrooms you need in a building or how much you need here. And the other layer of that is, without knowing how much FEMA funding we're going to get, it's really hard to present to the taxpayers a project and be able to say to them, this is how it's going to be paid
And
for.
that's an
So
additional.
the only reason the elementary thing is not up first in March is because we just don't, there's not enough time to put together a project with the legal restrictions of the voting timeline. So the thought was, take care of the RFA stuff that we know needs to be taken care of. If we waited until December to do them together, because of the problems with supplies and workers, if we vote a project in March at RFA, there's a chance we can start working in the summer of 2022. If we wait until May, we won't start working until the summer of 2023. So that's why we're trying to get the project in March, because we can get work going a whole year sooner. If we wait and do them together, you're probably, you're looking way out. So, and then the December vote gets us starting work on everything in the elementary schools in 2023. And it doesn't matter if we voted in May of 2022, September of 2022, December of 2022, we're still breaking ground in the summer of 2023. So we chose December to give ourselves enough time to make sure we have everything we need in that project.
Yeah, but that schedule that you just outlined, without doing the grade banding or some remapping of the elementary schools, like for next year, means that everything's going to stay pretty much status quo for 2 years versus what it could change. I think I'd certainly like to.
I think the
hear
key
that
and we haven't had the conversation in detail with Ross, but the key for the restructuring or the redistricting, if you're going to redraw the lines for next year, you need to make sure that those lines stay solid and true through to whatever we end up doing with the capital projects. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
You don't want to redraw the lines and then 3 years later, once you're finished renovating buildings, redraw the lines again. Those lines got to be able to
Yeah.
stay with whatever happens next.
But you could do something subtle, because unlike our current configuration where we're mapping 6 catchment areas for the buildings, this, with the new, with what Ross is doing, because he's combined schools, we're actually working with 3 large catchment areas, which encompass
Correct.
2 schools. So you could do some,
The
as long as
banding
you're
would make
close,
those
you
lines
could
a
do
lot
some subtle
easier.
stuff.
Correct. The
Yeah.
banding would make the lines a lot
Okay.
easier.
Well, I'm probably getting off into some other discussion, but I'm just curious of how it related to
To capital. plan.
the
It's a
capital planning. So I'll
Big part
just
of it.
kind of leave it there.
Has to be a big part of it.
So any other discussion on the CAP? I'll add those resolutions into the district response on 3. And then do we want it brought back as an audit committee without being on the next board agenda? Or do you want me to send it out with the resolutions on there? And I'll put it on audit and board for consideration next month if we would like.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just,
Yeah, we do it together. You know.
yeah. I think so.
Okay. Next on the agenda, draft audit committee charter development. So we looked a little over the charter and the guidance. What was sent out is simply just putting the district into the template. Our name, no real changes to the template. This is the template off the comptroller's documents. So it can be, altered to the district as they see fit. We went with the template so far. So any additions, discussions, deletions that, we want to consider.
Cindy, she called me last night, said she wasn't feeling well. Then this morning she said she really taken a turn for the worse, so she didn't want to come in. But she said she's wondering if we could postpone this until next one, because she had some questions and she wanted to know if we could, and you just kind of answered that, if we could add a couple
Yeah,
things, so.
She emailed me too.
Okay, she did,
She
okay.
wants to talk about a few things.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's just.
Yeah, 'cause they're not, I mean,
This is an ongoing thing anyway.
yeah, so, okay, so thank you.
Yeah.
And that is it for the audit committee side. Any
Okay, all right.
Oh, good time. Good morning, Chris.
I was gonna say not bad timing. Good morning.
The finance committee, first up, we have Christine Crowley from Fiscal Advisors.
Everyone does have your passions, terrific.
An exciting drive into the Philippines.
It was exciting.
Well, John's going out there, so.
I turn on Floyd and there's that initial curve
Uh-huh.
and my car, I was going very slow but there was cars parked on the side and my car swung right around and I was like,
Oh,
I'm
boy.
just gonna hit him. I just know I'm gonna hit him. I probably couldn't have gotten out of the car. I was so close, but.
Well, right here in Rome, then, right on.
What's that?
Right by St. Peter's.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, school,
Yeah,
yeah.
there is a.
Yeah.
That's quite a curve.
It is, yeah, it's really
It is,
almost a right
and
angle.
usually I wasn't going fast, obviously, you just
It's
turned,
just,
but
yeah.
oh well. So it was exciting, but I made it safely and I didn't have to call and say I'm waiting for the police report. So it's all good. Okay, so the first attachment. Let's make sure to see what you all have here so that I know that. Okay, so the first attachment in your packet is what we reviewed many times before. And Mr. Nash, I'm not sure if you're familiar with these or not, but I can certainly go through all of them with you. So the summary of debt service and estimated building aid, we'll start with this packet. So this, if you recall, is a summary of all the district's debt service as well as related building aid. And the front page is a summary, and then each following page are the individual bond issues with our individual building aid. And so we can see for 22-23, we have about 7.7 million of debt service. We don't have any outlay project built in at this point. We have building aid of about 7.76. We have aid on capital outlay from last year of about 71,000. So for capital purposes, the local share needed is a negative 91,000. So that means that our debt service, or excuse me, our building aid exceeds our debt service by about $91,000, closer to 92,000. So that's everything that has been completed, and we know the information on now, and that does include the $14.2 million ongoing project. So Then the next attachment is the actual financing plan that's scheduled to be at the top right, proposition 1. Looks like this.
That's not what it is.
I think you have to keep going. We're about at least 7 pages or maybe a little more than that for the future budget summary, 10 pages to each budget summary. So page 11 would be the financing plan for this.
Which I believe is the last page on what this is. if I'm not
Correct.
What's the
correct.
title of it again? Sorry.
Okay, okay.
Okay.
The very last
Page
one,
11.
Schedule D, Prop 1 on the.
Fingers aren't working too good. so you gotta-
I'm sorry to see that.
Okay, I got it.
Got it. Okay. Very good. So this gives Dave and his team just the prior schedule looked at a summary of everything related to capital so that he has one spot to go. But when we have projects that are ongoing and aren't in permanent financing, we want to make sure that we look at the financing plan individually so that we make sure that we're following what the project actually is doing and can update it appropriately. So that's what this schedule is showing. And this is a fluid schedule until everything is completed. So you see at the top, we have are you still
What is
looking for the
that?
right?
Yeah, I had a
Yep.
blank piece. I was wondering if I was.
Gotcha. Nope, you've got to have the right
Okay,
piece of
all
paper.
right.
You got it. So at the top, we have our assumptions. So we have the voter approval was in 19. We have each of the different phases with the expected completion dates. And if you recall, these dates are very important because that shows us when the project will be completed and when we can expect building aid to begin. So we want to make sure we keep those dates in line and on the schedule. So if Dave's in a meeting and hears about schedule change, he can call us and say, hey, we had 22 on here, but they're now talking about it being in 2023. What does that do? And we can update the financing.
So then a new question.
Yep.
The building aid itself, it doesn't kick in until the project's done, or
Right, so it's the latter of 18 months after SED approval or when the certificate of substantial completion and final cost
Okay.
report is submitted. And that's by building. There is an option for an early aid start. So if a project is expected to take longer than 18 months to complete, then the district can submit an early aid start request to SED, and then that would get aid flowing earlier.
gotcha.
And that's, there's certain circumstances. So if you, if the project is supposed to take more than 18 months when it's originally designed,
Mhm.
if there's a delay that's beyond the district's control, such as litigation, lack of labor to
Mhm.
do the work, lack of supplies, those are all things that can be,
Mhm.
can play into that.
Okay,
And litigation, I don't know if I said litigation.
you did.
You did.
Okay. Good. Okay, so then under financing, we have the dates of when we would expect the borrowings to take place. And then the chart at the bottom is the important part for the district because those are the actual budget numbers. And so again, these were built into the schedule we just looked at, but just so you know, for this current project, what's going on. So if you look at line 2223, you can see we have 14,065,491 outstanding. Within 22-23 fiscal year, there'll be about $559,000 of principal payment, about $210,000 of interest. And then if we keep going to the right to column 8, total debt service 770. That's simply the principal plus interest. Then we're showing our building aid. And in this column, you can see, so column 9, the building aid, you can see fiscal year 22 is only about 198,000. Fiscal year 23 is up to 467. And then we're up to $1 million, about 70 in 23-24. And that corresponds to above the phase 1, 2, and 3, those completion dates. So that's why those dates are so important because that's where we're building in that revenue back.
Another question. So the building aid itself, so we don't get a lump sum, we get, as long as we have that service on that project, is how they give us the building aid.
Exactly. So the building aid is when it's a reconstruction project, which all of these SED project numbers are, it's over 15 years.
Okay,
And so we hold on issuing the bonds until we know when those final cost reports will be submitted. So we know when that
Exactly,
aid is going to start. So then we can have the building aid and debt service end in the same year.
okay.
Exactly right.
Nice. Did we submit our, whatever we had to submit by December 1st?
Yes. that
We're
is
all
all
set,
set.
okay, just making sure.
Yes.
'Cause I think you can ask for an extension or something because of extenuating circumstances.
Right, that's that early aid
Yeah.
start that I mentioned, exactly. And so my colleague, Mike Visconti, he works closely with Dave and his team on getting everything together from the state aid filing standpoint to make sure everything is hitting the target dates. So then column 10, we have premiums on dams. So that's the easiest way to explain that for kind of layman's terms is that's money that the purchaser provides the district to be able to bring the net interest rate lower for the district. And I can get into more nitty gritty on that, but if you want, but that's the layman's terms of it. Then column 11 is the local share related to this project. So what tax levy for this project alone would need to be raised. And you can see for 22-23, it's about 125,000. So because other projects, when we go back to this original schedule we looked at, we were at a negative. It's because other projects of the district, prior projects, have more building aid coming in than debt service being paid. So that helps to offset this project. So that is where we are with everything that is currently going on with the district with respect to building aid and debt service. Are there any questions?
Balance outstanding, is that the amount of money left to be obligated in under the,
So balance
under
outstanding.
the project? So I mean, is
Yep,
that,
so that's the amount of debt that the district has issued as of beginning of that fiscal year.
2 bands, I believe, right? We did
Correct.
7 and then we redeemed that and took 14 approximately.
Exactly correct.
and that's going against the 14 million authorized for the capital project, right?
Yes.
Exactly correct.
Chris, if you can do your best to explain this, I think I'm gonna work off of the summary page.
Okay.
Something that's important, we were just talking about capital planning. And that, as a superintendent, I'm involved in this pretty deeply, but one thing that's not overly well explained to a lot of folks is the understanding of when you have debt expiring is usually when districts go back out for major projects so that they keep their debt limit the same, so there's no tax impact. When I'm looking at the summary sheet,
Yeah.
can you just help us understand an example of when we'd be looking to do something like that to make sure that we're not, because what'll happen is if you don't continue to do capital projects, the debt will expire. Then when you do need to do something, you got to raise taxes versus if you had just done it when debt was expiring and added more debt, you kind of keep that tax rate stable.
Exactly.
So
right.
can you, within
Yeah,
this chart, can you just give
absolutely.
an example of, even if it's
Absolutely.
a small project, we want to do to try to avoid that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the perfect example is if you look at fiscal year 24-25, and you follow it all the way to the right, you can see that the tax levy in that year will be related to capital will be 253,000.
Are you still on the same sheet or different?
I'm
The
sorry,
first
going
sheet,
back
the
to the
summary.
top.
Oh, yes,
I'm
yeah,
sorry.
okay, I just wanted to
Okay.
make, I thought that's what you said, so, okay. the big one.
Yep, so the very first page, that original
Yeah.
attachment we looked at. Okay, so you can see we have $253,000 of local share. So that's tax levy that needs to be raised for capital purposes. The next year goes down to 181,000. And there on out for a couple of years, it's low, then it does creep back up a little bit, but then drops again. So the thought is that in order to maintain a stable tax levy for the taxpayers, when the debt expires, as was mentioned, bring a new project on to replace that tax levy so that you're not having that drop and then that increase in your tax levy. So if we were to backfill in 25-26, another project, we could keep the tax levy at that 253,000. So you're maintaining a stable tax levy for your residents while doing the capital work that's needed. And to Mr. Blake's point, if you were to let that drop down and then you had to bring it back up, and I don't know off the top of my head what percentage this would be for the district, but let's say you had you dropped it down to 180 and then you brought it back up to 253 or even higher. That tax levy increase the perception of the public is that with the tax cap being 2%, even though it's a capital exclusion that doesn't fall within that 2%, you might be looking at 2% for operating, but another 2.5 or 3% for capital. So now your tax, now your budget, you're looking at a 5% increase, 5.5% increase. And it's something that's very hard for the public to understand and grasp that concept of why you're so much higher and still within your tax cap.
I just wanted you to explain that
answer
because,
that?
yes, because I want you to explain it because we haven't really done it that way in Rome yet.
Right.
And that's simply because when you're renovating entire buildings, you don't have that luxury.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
now that we're through that and we're trying to get into the cycle of basically ongoing
Upkeep.
improvements
Exactly.
and hopefully in a few years, yearly capital votes, we understand at the top level why that is. So, you know, some years that difference might be pretty small, right? And some years that difference could be pretty large. And if you look down the chart, you know, you've got a difference of 285 to 120, that's $160,000 difference. So between those 2 years, you would be able to plan more capital work to not have to raise the tax levy versus a year where, you know, it might not be major amounts of work that you do, but those are just things I wanted to bring to the attention of the board as we start having those conversations, because it does make a difference to keeping your buildings updated if you can continuously do small capital projects to keep that tax levy stable. Yeah. Thank
Now,
you.
can you can avoid the increase in the tax levy by using the capital reserve to compensate for the increase year over year?
So you can, so the capital reserve can be used as similar to like a down payment on a project. That's how you want to think about it. So the capital reserve would would allow you to borrow less, but still have the building aid on the full project, resulting in a lower local share.
So you could get there
can't-
that way too, at least for a year or two, right? If you're
Right, what you can't do, I just want to make sure that you're not thinking about it this way, is you can't say, okay, in 24-25, we have that $253,000 local share. I want to use $100,000 from capital reserve and only have $150,000 local share. You can't do it that way. You have to do it as part of the original
The referendum.
project referendum.
Yeah. You can only use the capital reserve up front at the beginning of the process to let the taxpayers know
No,
we're
that's what
gonna
you
use
do.
our reserves
Right.
if we would need to use,
Okay.
increase the tax
Right.
levy
It's not, so it's not a slush fund to fill the gap.
Right.
for previous things, correct?
Right. So if
It
you
is
wanted to
moving
bring the
forward, though,
253 down.
For something new.
Oh, yeah, for,
As of
yeah,
today,
yes.
you would need to either
For
use
capital
fund balance,
purposes.
debt service fund, something of those, along those lines. Does that make sense to you?
Oh, you could, so you could use fund balance, yeah. You just can't use capital. You
Correct.
can't use that reserve, but you
Can't
could.
use that
you could
reserve,
use-
right? You have debt service fund or fund balance. Now that, I'm not saying that I would recommend that. Because you want to keep your reserves in your fund balance, but to the extent that there's budget, pressure that would be how that would be accomplished at this point in time.
I had a question then. You had that category 8 on capital outlay, $71,000. What is that exactly?
So last year, so if you go back over to the left 2 columns, capital outlay exception expenditures. So last year,
Yeah.
72,762. Yep, go to the left 2 columns and up 1 line. You'll see the 72,762.
Oh, okay.
So that's a capital outlay project that the district did. And so how the state deals with capital outlay projects is they will, as long as they're $100,000 or less, they will provide you with the aid the following fiscal year. from 20%.
Oh, okay. Mhm.
So that's why we break that out, because otherwise it doesn't flow well when you're looking at the total debt service and total building aid. So we try to break those out so it's easier to identify.
There was discussion and consideration of moving that to 250, but I don't believe it ever.
It hasn't passed as of
Yeah.
yet, but it would make an enormous amount of sense to me.
Yeah,
You might see it
100.
pass
You can't do
pretty
anything with
soon.
100,000,
Right.
yeah,
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 it would be great if we could.
I'm surprised it didn't, well, that last governor's budget cycle, the ESSER funds weren't known yet, were they?
No.
So it might be this year then, I mean, because they're pushing everyone to use their ESSER funds for capital projects is
Yeah.
what they're doing, so. Maybe this is the year they up that limit so people can do it.
Exactly. It would be very nice. So some districts will have a hard time building up to that 250. But even if you do it over a few years, those districts that can't afford to immediately go to 250, it would be so well worth it.
Yeah.
It makes so much more sense. You really can't do much with $100,000 anymore. Any other questions or concerns or thoughts, or even outside of just what was covered here? I'm open for anything you guys might want to discuss. We're good.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So we'll be doing the next borrowing for the $14.2 million project this coming July. And so that's when we'll start early spring working with Dave and doing that borrowing. So you'll see more discussion on that as the spring comes along. But other than that.
So does that mean you're contemplating that the $14 million will be spent by July?
So we're actually thinking that the full 14 million will be spent by summer of 23. So this summer and next summer. So right now we're in short-term borrowing, the bond anticipation note. So it matures this July, the band that's outstanding, bond anticipation note that's outstanding. So it'll mature and then we need to renew it for another year. Excuse me.
But in order to go, what's the criteria to go to a bond? Don't you have to have final cost reports and?
So we like to wait for final cost, to know that final cost reports are going to be submitted, that there's no delays. So we're looking to go to bonds in June of 24. And that's because phase 3 final cost reports will be submitted in December of 23. And so that's after that submission. And so then we know for sure what the stream of building aid is.
Okay, so you said June of 24. I for some reason, I
Yeah.
thought it was next summer and I was wondering.
Gotcha. No, so this summer we'll renew the ban. And then the following summer we'll renew the ban. And then once everything's completed
Okay, yeah,
in 24, then
yeah,
we'll move
okay.
forward. Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And if for some reason things move along faster and things are completed faster, we could forego doing another bond anticipation that will go to bonds a year early. It all depends. I'm not gonna hold my breath on that with the delays and materials and finding labor. So, but we're certain everything is very fluid and flexible.
And the band interest rates are generally considerably less than bonding.
Correct.
The bands were real, I can't remember, I'm trying to think of the number off the top of my head of
I
the
want to
last
say you're
band, but
probably 0.3 or
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember
0.2.
you said it was very low.
yeah, rounds to zero. Very,
Yeah.
very close.
You only pay
Waiting for
interest.
it.
Don't round it
We were
to
waiting
zero.
for it to
No,
go to the
no.
negative. We had one conversation, we we're waiting for it to go to the negative,
Yes.
they were gonna pay us to take their money.
Yeah.
Yes.
It was so low.
At the beginning of COVID.
And the bands, you only pay interest, right?
So you pay interest for the first year, and then at the second year anniversary, you have to start making what's called a legal minimum principal reduction.
And that's
So you do.
1/5, is that 1/5?
So it's, so you amortize at 5% over the, what's called a period of probable usefulness. I know you're very familiar with that just by looking at ordinances, but so if there's a 30-year period of probable usefulness on this project, even though you're only financing it over 15, because the way the state aid works, you can amortize it at 5% over 30 years, and that's the legal minimum. Usually what we do, excuse me, is if you have a few years of bans and we know that building aid is starting to come in, we don't ever make the minimum. We meet the principal plus interest to get as close to that
Mhm.
revenue as possible, just so you can pay down as much principal as possible.
Well, on bands, so you can only keep them out for 5 years, can't you, or is that?
But yeah, 5 years.
Okay.
Yes, yeah,
But you can pay on the 5% or whatever for
exactly.
30, okay, gotcha.
Exactly, right, yeah, yeah. So, and so that's, so if you had a project that only had a 5-year period of probable usefulness, maximum legal term, then you would definitely do that 1/5 each year.
Yeah, gotcha.
So this just happens to be a longer term
Yeah.
for the legality of it.
Okay, thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thanks, girls.
Thanks, Chris.
You're very welcome. I didn't know it was on there. Scared me.
He was taking a nap.
How are you?
I was talking with Schuster.
I left it back.
Drive safe.
Yes, thank you. I'll try not to hit any resident vehicles.
You're probably okay, on the major road, you're okay, it's in the city.
Exactly,
probably,
it
'cause the
was
snow
fine.
came
It
so
was
late,
fine.
hasn't been out yet, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. All right, thank you, everybody.
Thank you,
Any
Chris.
follow-up
Okay, we'll see ya.
questions? Absolutely. Happy holidays.
Yeah,
Likewise.
for sure.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Next on the agenda, included a document from ASBO and just wanted to put it on the radar of the finance committee. The difference in foundation aid coming up, if you can remember back to past budget cycles, January of the governor's budget is kind of your first look at foundation aid and the way they ran it with freezing of foundation aid and then individual year legislation. So ASBO put something out to just kind of discuss it and just as item of, we report our end of year expenditures, which will drive a lot of reimbursable aids, enrollment figures, those kind of things drive the next year's foundation aid calculation. They pull a November database and they're just saying it's more important this year or more, you get an earlier look at what your foundation aid is likely to be for the next year. So two areas on the ASBO communication I thought were worth highlighting. One, that their view with a strong enough commitment to make sense to incorporate these numbers in budget development with the caveat that updated school district data will impact the final numbers. So, as of current, it was pretty close to what we were projecting when we read the initial legislation. And ASBO is, recommending that that be part of your initial budget projections, initial budget looks. I'd also point out the highlighted directly beneath that on the bottom of the first page, that there's also the possibilities the exact phase in structure could be modified. This could all change under the development of the state budget. But this is what exists currently and what's out there.
So cautiously optimistic.
Cautiously optimistic.
Yeah. You
Yeah.
never know.
Is the
The bottom
bottom
line is
line
you
that-
never know.
We're gonna get halfway to our formula amount the first year and then the rest of it, so after 2 years, you're beyond formula. Is that-
Pretty much.
Correct.
Is that
It's not
good?
exactly a halfway, I don't think, calculation, correct? It's
Darn
a little-
close, yeah.
It's pretty close. It was a 3-year phase, and so last year we got a big chunk at the last minute as well, if you remember, and then the scheduled amount this year is more than last year's. So there's still a lot of moving parts with it. People are still not confident that it's actually going to happen.
Don't
After all
say
these years.
that.
Yeah, well, it's
Been
the
here before.
skepticism of Albany. I mean, you've been through it enough times.
Yeah.
I'm, to be honest with you, I'm more confident that this is going to happen, that we'll see the 2 large increases the next 2 years. My bigger concern is, once that phase-in is done, what do they do then? Because my guess is you're gonna see a bottoming out of foundation aid and minimal, if any, increases.
Yeah.
Which will be not good, because people are gonna see you got a ton of money coming in and they're gonna expect you to spend it. And the reality is, if 3 years from now, they freeze foundation aid for 4 years, 5 years, if you budgeted on based on everything that come in the door, you're not gonna be able to sustain that. So I think that it's nice to know that the revenues are gonna be there, but until we know 3 years from now, what those increases or what foundation aid formulas are gonna look like, it's tough to really commit to utilizing large chunks of that to increase what you're doing.
So is your concern related to the federal aid going away, which is helping the state?
Yeah, they have yet to tell us where the foundation aid money is coming from. They've just said you're getting all these billions of dollars across the state, but they haven't said, is it coming from tax revenue? Is it coming from whatever revenue? Is it coming? They haven't even gone as far, Paul, as to say it's coming from the federal stimulus monies. They've just said, you're getting your money.
Here it is.
Yeah, I've heard 2 similar conversations in 2 other school districts in New York. That they're worried the 3, yeah.
And the tough thing is, obviously, from our point of view, right? People see that you got the money coming in the door, they're gonna want you to spend it, which I understand that, which you gotta spend a little bit of it, but until you know what is going to happen after everyone gets made whole on foundation aid, it's really hard to predict what things are gonna look like, because they've done this in the past, and after they've gotten everybody whole, they've completely changed everything around and then people went in the tank, so.
We're gonna make you whole,
Elimination,
we're gonna
adjustments and
introduce
all
this
that.
as negative.
Yeah, yeah, we're gonna make you whole and we're gonna keep you there forever.
You're whole, but we're gonna have this reduction afterward.
Now, in general, what does foundation aid cover? It's primarily educational things, right? I mean, programs and people.
The
and-
general fund budget,
Yeah.
anything in the general fund budget.
Driven highly by enrollment, poverty figures, student with disabilities carry more weight. There's a weighting figure to the attendance, but that in general, it's not a reimbursable type aid like transportation, excess costs driven by expenditure.
So some of it could find its way into supporting facilities and things like that? Or is,
You'll find a little bit of it in the capital outlays. So in the budget, if we put a capital outlay, $100,000 project in the budget, then yeah, foundation aid could support that. Basically, think of your general fund budget, anything in that document could be supported by foundation aid.
And I would add, this entire discussion is foundation aid only, doesn't really touch on what the state's gonna do with reimbursable aids. Will they change any of that?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's a whole
You know,
other piece
yeah,
about
Just
it.
something to.
Here's how we're
keep
gonna
on the
get you
radar.
your additional foundation aid. We're gonna do something to your BOCES aid over here,
Yep.
or your transportation
It
aid.
can be. Yep.
Yeah,
but it's
Yes.
good news because foundation aid is our most flexible kind of aid, right? That we can use it and, you know, it's not prescribed in how we
Yeah,
should
the
use
best
it.
way to look at it is it's the only one that's non-controllable. So BOCES aid and transportation aid is controllable. If we know the game and we know how the inputs affect the outputs, we can make decisions on our end to ensure that we maximize that. Foundation aid, we have
Yeah.
no control over. So yes, to your point, that's correct. It's helpful.
But complicated. I can't believe it.
yeah, yeah.
It's that time of year again.
Item 3, if there's no more on the foundation aid, federal grants worksheet, bring this forth once a year just to get a look at our newest allocations for the year, look at them at a year-over-year basis to our existing grants. I want to make sure it's highlighted that ARP monies are not on this, as the time frame is greater than 1 year, didn't include ARP monies on this sheet. So if you can look at it and look at the bottom where it says totals, not including ARP, just wanted to point out that, you know, we're about 7.2 million in our federal fund grants allocations, approximately flat, you know, $23,000 increase overall. You can see the individual grants, pluses and minuses. As I point out, just about annually, the UPK grant, again, the allocation is flat. They've had it flat for as long as I can remember. So just something to keep in mind is the costs of any, you know, we have a lot of staff in the grants as the staff costs increase, benefit costs increase, the health insurance costs increase. If they're not covered within the grant, you know, they have the possibility of falling back to the general fund. Some grants may not be final. Like for UPK, the actual revenue you received is based on your enrollment figures. And for the IDEA 611 grant, where you'll see 3 asterisks, I'd like to keep the board aware that we're currently budgeting a little over 300,000 use of our carryover funds from IDEA 611. So if those get expended, you know, those funds will have, or those expenditures will have to be looked at in terms of falling upon the general fund once the carryover is potentially used up. The various grants have different carryover rules, which of course we adhere to, but that's why you'll see varying amounts amongst them. Any questions individually on the grants or the grants worksheet in total?
Good, thanks for showing us. I like it.
Multi-year financial plan discussion. I just kept this as a reoccurring item on the finance committee as we work through how we're doing our corrective action plan. So if you remember, I'll bring forth the report again next month and put it back on there. We'll include the current year projections and get into the outlook. Probably talk more about the assumptions, what we're going to put there, the assumptions for forward projections. So just keeping it on the finance agenda, no, you know, update for this meeting. Budget transfers that you'll see on Thursday, there's 3 of them. One is from TAs to one-to-one aides. We've been, you know, intentionally hiring the one-to-one aides to move into TAs, so there's more money in the TA code available and less money in the one-to-one aides. So hence we're making the transfer to cover. The second and third one are really a coding reclassification, social work, A 2825. We had those staff members housed in 2110 130, which is our secondary teachers. So we moved the money to get it into the proper coding.
Okay.
Straightforward. And I believe that is it. Is there any questions? I'd be happy to.
So are all the plain social workers paid for now? Budget done?
I believe we've got 5 social workers in ARP and 2 in general fund. Is what I have in my head.
So do we have any more outstanding that we're trying to hire? We're there, kind of there. with
Last
this.
one is appointed Thursday.
Before we conclude though, could I ask a question in executive session? It's regarding something in here, not, it's a finance question. But I want to do an executive session though. It'll be quick. It's not gonna be long, just.
Sure.
Thanks, Martha.
Thank you.
You just supposed to go. Thank you.
It was just,
Yeah,
when I was,
Oh,
yeah, I haven't said anything yet, yeah.
Rob, we're kicking you off. See ya.
I think he waved goodbye.